When you think of Austin, Texas, what comes to mind? Probably explosive growth, right? A vibrant culture, music, technology, but underneath that shiny surface, there is a hidden story. A story of two very different cities living side by side, intentionally divided by a plan that was written almost 100 years ago, and that history is absolutely still shaping Austin's future. Get this, this wasn't buried in some secret memo. This is a direct quote from page 57 of the Austin 1928 Master Plan. This was the city's blueprint, a document that literally engineered racial and economic segregation, and its effects are powerfully felt to this very day. But here's the thing you have to understand. Before this plan, Austin looked completely different. The idea that communities of color just always lived in the east side, that's a total myth. The reality was a city with this amazing network of thriving, independent communities spread all over the map. I mean, look at this. After emancipation, formerly enslaved people established at least 15 freedmen's communities all across Austin. Clarksville, just west of what we now call downtown, Kinchinville, way out in the southwest, these were all self-sufficient neighborhoods, with their own schools, their own businesses, their own churches. Austin wasn't a segregated city by nature. It was a city that was segregated by design. In 1917, the Supreme Court ruled that cities couldn't create zoning laws based explicitly on race. That was illegal. So the all-white, all-male Austin City Council and a lot of other city governments across the U.S. got creative. They needed a new strategy to force segregation, one that wasn't technically illegal. The 1928 Master Plan was the answer, and the plan was disturbingly clever. It didn't just draw a line on a map. It created a whole system of punishments and rewards to force black and brown residents into this newly created Negro district east of what was then called East Avenue. And here's how they did it. It was a cruel push-pull dynamic. The city systematically pushed black residents out of their homes in Central and West Austin by just cutting off essential services. No more paved streets, no trash pickup. They wouldn't even hook up the water line. And at the same time, they pulled them to East Austin with a promise that all those services plus new schools and parks would be available there and only there. For so many families, it was an impossible choice. And that line on the map, it didn't stay a line on the map for long. In the 1960s, the city built I-35 right along that old East Avenue line, essentially carving a concrete canyon right through the heart of the city. The division was now permanent, physical, and unmistakable. But it gets even worse. The plan also designated East Austin as the only place for industry. A textbook case of environmental racism. They literally concentrated power plants, fuel storage tank farms, all kinds of manufacturing in the exact same place they forced communities of color to live. It basically guaranteed the most marginalized residents would be breathing the most polluted air. So fast forward a few decades, the Civil Rights Act comes along and makes all this explicit legal segregation unenforceable. So problem solved, right? Not exactly. The tools of division didn't just disappear, they changed. The lines that were once drawn by law were now to be enforced by the pressures of the market. Former Austin City Council member Ora Houston, she put it perfectly. The legal force was gone, but that economic architecture of segregation, it was still there, firmly in place, just waiting for new pressures to come along. And this shift happened over decades. It was like a 1-2 punch. First, in the 30s, you had federal redlining maps that basically starved East Austin of investment. You couldn't get a mortgage, so families couldn't build generational wealth. Then after all those decades of intentional neglect, the developers in the 80s and 90s all of a sudden saw those centrally located land as a bargain, and that sparked the gentrification and the soaring property taxes that are now pushing out the very same communities that were once forced to live there. The result of this long, painful history is just, it's stark. Today, Austin isn't really one city, it's two cities existing right next to each other, but with dramatically different realities for the people who live there. Let's let this sink in. A person's zip code in Austin can predict their lifespan. There's nearly a 20-year difference in life expectancy between some neighborhoods in West Austin and East Austin. 20 years. That's the direct inheritance of the 1928 plan. And when you look at the resources, it's not hard to see why. The disparities are everywhere. Fewer hospitals and fewer grocery stores with fresh food on the east side, more industrial pollution, less access to public transit. None of this is an accident. These are the direct, predictable results of public policy decisions, and the economic pressure has gotten so intense that it's created this bizarre demographic flip. The very same communities that were once forcibly segregated into East Austin are now being forced out of the city entirely, pushed into the suburbs just to find a place they can afford. But this is not where the story ends, not by a long shot. The very same communities that were once forcibly segregated into East Austin are fighting back. This isn't a story of displacement, it's of resilience and resistance. We're not sitting back and watching it happen. We're actively fighting to stay in our homes and shape our own future. For decades, you've had groups like WEB² fighting against environmental injustice and gentrification, and now they're being joined by newer organizations like East Austin Conservancy, all focused on one critical goal: survival and community preservation. And their strategies are super practical and community focused. We're talking about things like helping elderly homeowners pay their skyrocketing property tax bills, providing financial counseling to stop foreclosures, and showing up to City Hall to demand that the city actually listens to their plans for their own neighborhoods. Now, one of the most powerful tools we have to survive and thrive is something called the Community Land Trust. This model has been really successful in other cities, and it offers a real way to break that cycle of displacement for good. So how does it work? Well, it's kind of genius. A nonprofit CLT buys and holds land in a trust for the community forever. Then it can sell or lease the homes or the commercial buildings on top of that land at affordable prices. The key is that it separates the value of the building from the value of the land. Because the land is no longer on the crazy speculative market, the housing on top of it can stay affordable for generations. Which really brings us back to the fundamental question. That 1928 plan was made by a powerful few for their own interests. As the skyline just keeps growing, the fight is on to make sure that this time the future is written by the communities themselves.